Welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening. Thanks for the introduction as well, Martin. So, as Martin said, my name is Mark Hunter. I'm the Deputy Director for Performance Benchmarking and Data at the IPA. And this evening, I'm going to be talking to you about how the IPA uses the power of data, or uses our data to support major project delivery in government. So just a brief overview of the topics I'm going to cover. I did make a note actually of all the things that were put on the survey, so I've got a few of those down. But if there's any I've missed, please do tell me at the end. So I'll give a brief introduction to myself and the IPA for those that aren't familiar with the work of the IPA, before moving on to talk about the government's major project portfolio, GMPP, which you will hear me mention a lot throughout the presentation. Before getting really to the meat of it in the data collection, reporting and analysis section of the presentation, before concluding with talking about some of the challenges we face and how we are addressing them. So let's get straight into it. So about me. So my background is actually in the energy sector. I started my career with E.ON UK, the utility, where I joined their grad scheme. Which gave me a lovely opportunity to sample lots of different types of roles. But it's where I first developed kind of an affinity for numbers and analysis, and particularly in those days, building complicated models out of Microsoft Excel. Following completion of that grad scheme, I then joined their nuclear development team, which was, I think, about 10 people back in those days when I joined. I think I was about number 10. Which only a few months after I joined actually was spun out into a joint venture with RWE, which subsequently became Horizon Nuclear Power, which some of you may have heard of, now defunct, sadly. But I was with Horizon for about 7 years, working on a nuclear new build project called Wilver Newydd, which is right on the northern tip of Anglesey, the site. And there's a lovely artist's impression of what it would have looked like had they secured the funding to go ahead with that project. But while I was there, I looked, I did a range of roles. The two most relevant to sort of analytics and a career in data were the evaluation of the economic case, obviously hugely important for a big project, and then a good stint in the PMO, in the project controls team, predominantly looking at risk management, but I also picked up reporting, change control, and cost management. And we were quite a small team, so I ended up covering everything except schedule, which obviously gave me a huge amount of experience and really enthusiasm for project controls, which I'm sure everyone here shares, of course. I did a brief stint then on Hinkley Point C with Turner and Townsend. Did a few months as a risk manager down there before relocating up to Birmingham to join the Gambling Commission. So the Gambling Commission are the gambling regulator for Great Britain. So all about consumer protection. And if you were here at the beginning of the chat, when Martin and I were talking about the use of data, a hugely interesting area and you know, really a lot of data and a lot of potential uses for data, both in terms of the gambling operators themselves and the Gambling Commission's remit in the protection of players. So lots of opportunities there to apply AI and machine learning to our data sets, which was great experience for my current job with the IPA. So I joined the IPA just in February. Actually a very similar role to the one I held at the Gambling Commission. So I look after the analysis and insight unit, the benchmarking, and I mean, my title is performance benchmarking and data. So basically everything to do with data, business intelligence, reporting, all falls under my remit, including some of the system work, which I'll talk about in the course of the presentation. So that's me, the IPA. So I don't know how familiar people are with the IPA. It's something you may have come across if you've ever had to ask the government for money or worked on public sector projects. But the IPA is the government's centre of expertise for infrastructure and major projects. Our mission is to support the successful delivery of all government projects, particularly those major projects. The graphic is just showing some of our this lovely pyramid graphic showing some of the things we look at, some of the things we do. Obviously, that purple box there is where I sit predominantly, so driving excellence by setting standards and measuring performance. And we sit at the heart of government, reporting jointly to Cabinet Office and into Treasury as well. I mentioned the GMPP before, and I'll give a more detailed explanation of what that is and what it looks like. But in sort of practical terms, what the IPA does is provide assurance, advice and support and data and reporting services to and on the GMPP. So we look at assurance reviews, basically making sure that projects are fit to pass through various stage gates. We provide the projects with advice and support, so things like commercial advice as well as project management, project delivery advice, and then the data reporting. Obviously, I'm going to talk a lot more about that later. Also, professional capability, a key part of what the IPA does, and that's also very relevant to the work that I do. So that is looking at how fit the people who are working on these projects are to work on those projects, essentially. Do we have the right people, the right number of people with the right capabilities to deliver these massively ambitious projects and programs? A couple of other bits worth mentioning. Benchmarking, I'll talk more about later. But we've also got a remit to deliver confidence to industry. So this is a piece of work that is colloquially called within the IPA the pipeline, which is basically a publication that sets out the government's investment plans in major projects for the next sort of 3, 4, 5, 6 years. So beyond the period that Treasury sort of publish their spending reviews and budgets for, and that's all designed to give the supply chain confidence that there are these big projects coming forward. Just because they're not explicitly funded via Treasury doesn't mean they're not happening. And then the Transforming Infrastructure and Performance work, or TIP, is all about bringing together all the plans that government has, the IPA has, the initiatives we're leading to improve delivery performance. So that's a publicly available document, but really focused on all the things that will improve delivery performance. So things like modern methods of construction, which I'm sure people here will be much more familiar with than I am. So that's the IPA. I'll just touch a bit more on 2 of those areas because they have relevance or significant relevance to the work that I do and the data work. So the assurance piece, we conduct, there's a bit of jargon in here, you'll have to excuse all the abbreviations and civil service jargon, but we conduct assurance reviews for the vast majority of GMPP projects in support of HM Treasury approval events. So they're stage gates in all but name. So in order to secure funding and permission to progress into, say, delivery, projects have to receive an assurance review from us, which gives them the green light to proceed. And it's quite a big deal. It's quite a new thing for us. Previously, we had more of an advisory role, but now if a project receives a red rating from their assurance review, they're not permitted to progress into delivery. So obviously quite high stakes, but we've got a very capable team of reviewers drawn from across government who conduct those reviews. It's a really thorough and really value-add process to those projects. Also say a little bit more about professional capability, because again, this has relevance to the data reporting and analytics that my team does. So this is all about setting those standards and building professional capability within the projects. So we work with those departments to make sure they are able to source the right people or to give their own staff the right sorts of training to allow them or to enable them to successfully deliver those projects. A lot of it's targeted at project leadership, but there's something there for everyone in the Government Projects Academy, as this is a central body for professional project delivery standards within government. So to give you an example of the types of program that are on there, our flagship is called the Major Project Leadership Academy, or MPLA, which we are putting all our SROs, so all our senior responsible owners, through that program, as well as the project directors or program directors. But it's quite a long and involved and challenging program. It's not a box tick exercise by any means. And that's all obviously designed to give us in the centre confidence that these projects are being well run and well managed. So the GMPP, the government's major project portfolio is all the projects for which the IPA has a remit and mandate to provide support and oversight. We don't exclusively work on the GMPP. There are some things that spill over. We will, for example, offer commercial advice to non-GMPP projects. But the bulk of what we do, and certainly the work that my team undertakes on the reporting and analysis, is all focused at these GMPP projects. They're the ones that are getting the stage gate assessments, the annual reviews. They're the ones for which we have a responsibility to report into Treasury for things like the spending review process as well. And it's what we tend to look at when we talk about the system level improvements of project delivery in government. So they're the ones where we're actively collecting data and actively managing. So what does a GMPP look like? You'll have to forgive the vagueness of these stats. Through a quirk of fate, our annual report is published tomorrow, and the precise numbers and the data within there is embargoed until tomorrow morning, sadly. So these are approximate values that we were comfortable sharing publicly before that report comes out. But it gives you a fair idea of the scale of things that we're talking about. So we've got 184 projects as at the end of Q4. So as at the end of March this year, covering 19 government departments. So not concentrated in your traditional departments you would guess be heavily involved, like DFT and MOD, spread really across the whole of government. Whole life costs in excess of £500 billion. So yeah, a huge sum of money, obviously. Average duration of these projects is just a little over 10 years. That's actually, the average obscures a little bit the variability in the durations. So that some projects of some categories of projects, the average is more like 5 years, but it's dragged up by MOD projects, which tend to be very, very long term. I think the average for them is something like 17 or 18 years. We've got about in excess of 16,000 people in the project teams for these projects. So this is not your contractors, not your tier ones, it's solely the project teams. So the majority of those will be public sector employees, civil servants, or employees of arm's length body, but there's a good smattering of contracts in there as well, of course. And the largest project, one you probably are all familiar with from the press coverage it receives, is HS2. It's actually by far and away the biggest project on the GMPP, as you'd probably expect from a huge project that size. The boxes below are just giving you some examples, a bit of a flavour of what else is in there. So I've grouped them here by the category of the annual reports. It's one of the ways we categorise our projects, as well as obviously by department and various other government initiatives we group them by. But we've got infrastructure and construction projects, which are 66 of the 184. So they're your kind of traditional infrastructure projects like road and rail. Government buildings as well, so things like prisons, hospitals, schools, buildings will all go in there as well. Got a couple of other examples there, the building safety remediation work, so that's the replacement of unsafe cladding programme that was initiated after the Grenfell disaster. And slightly more esoteric ones like the new polar research vessel, or I think it's called the RSS Sir David Attenborough, or Boaty McBoatface, as it was nearly called after they did the project, the public poll for naming that. So it's anything building stuff that's not military tends to belong to infrastructure and construction. Then we've got the red boxes, which is government transformation and services. So here we've got anything to do with, as you might guess from the name, the delivery of government services. So things like the vaccines task force, which is obviously part of the response to COVID, is in there. The National Skills Fund, which allocates funding to things like apprenticeship levies and all sorts of things like that. Another public-facing one there, Universal Credit, obviously a big programme very much in the public eye. And one I was familiar with from my time at the Gambling Commission, the 4th National Lottery Licence Competition. So quite a range of different things in there, some of them public-facing, some of them not. But generally, relatively short term or short life, short duration. As I said before, looking more 4 or 5 years rather than the 10 years plus that tend to be the typical duration in infrastructure and construction in particular. ICT are a bit similar to government transformation services, so they're purely IT projects. I have to confess my knowledge of these is significantly less than for the other categories, but I've got a few examples there. So the Making Tax Digital programme is in there, government as a platform, a massive programme, which you will have all seen if you've interacted with any government websites. And slightly more interesting one, a Met Office supercomputing project. So this is developing the platform to allow weather forecasting. And then finally, military capability. So not much to say about that. You can probably guess what they are. So this is anything to do with the MOD, whether it's to do with getting new bits of kit, like the Type 31 frigates or Astute-class submarines, or slightly more mundane things like the Defence Estate Optimisation Programme. So looking at where the army bases, etc., are located and how that can be optimised. So that's the GMPP, and I apologise again for the lack of graphics. The other reason it's not just the embargo of the annual report, all of our data is classified as official sensitive. So this is probably the least data-centric data presentation you'll ever get, because I'm not actually permitted to share any of it, which is a bit of a shame. There are some sneak peeks though later, so don't worry, it's not all dry words on slides. So where do we fit in? So one of my teams in the centre box there, the Analysis and Insight unit, takes data from all those projects that are on the GMPP, as well as from our internal functions, so assurance, professional capability being the key two, and produce a whole host of reports for a whole host of people. So some of those reports go back to projects, some out to departments, some onwards and upwards to central government, so into Cabinet Office and Treasury and number 10, the Prime Minister's Office. And some of those, like the annual report due tomorrow, go back out to the public and to industry. I'll talk a bit about collection and how we go about collecting that data before I talk about the reports themselves. But we have a good history of collecting this data. So we've got about 10 years now of GMPP data that's been collected quarterly. Obviously, the exact data set has changed in that time, but it's a really rich and obviously comprehensive data set covering project delivery for the past 10 years. We've just moved, just last year, to what we call GMPP Online, which is effectively, I mean, someone's uncharitably called it here an online spreadsheet. It's more of a user form that's been built within Treasury's cross-government financial reporting system, which is called OSCAR, which replaced, believe it or not, I'm sure something many of you will be familiar with, an Excel-based data collection process. So literally templates being emailed out to projects for them to fill in and return to us. So obviously, this is a huge benefit to us to be able to simplify that process, reduces the burden on my team extraordinarily, because there's no more, sending emails, correcting templates, people using old templates, for example. It's all there, all on the system with email reminders and things that just help, quality of life improvements that help with that process. The big one for us is the improvement in data quality. Systemizing that process has brought. So hugely reduced potential for data errors with in-system data validation. So these are usually hard flags to make sure that the right data types are being entered into the system. And also some conditionality around certain data types being only applicable to certain types of projects or projects in certain phases. Providing data outputs, another big time saver and a big win for the team, because the users and us are able to extract data as soon as it's been entered. Obviously, with a spreadsheet collation, that's not possible. But this allows a project to put their data in, immediately export it and look at it and disseminate it and share it as they see fit. And enables collaboration. So again, having a single platform allows everybody to see that data in real time, particularly the projects themselves, what we call SPOCs. So these are the single points of contact within departmental portfolio teams. who are responsible for chivying those projects along to actually provide the data, and the project leads within the IPA who are checking that data, working with the projects to make sure they understand the requirements, etc. And of course, my team who are making sure that it all gets done and all the process actually happens. So what are we collecting? It's quite a wide range of information, actually. I tend to describe it as broad but shallow. So we collect a lot of data about a lot of things, but not a massive amount of detail in anything. So the box on the left, basic information about the project. So this is stuff largely lifted from their business cases. So obvious things like the name of the project, the department it's reporting to, but also things like the drivers for the project, the intended outcomes, investment objectives, etc. If known, they'll also state their key suppliers in there as well. So it's kind of like the headline data for the project. Then on the bottom two boxes on the left there, we've got the approved and current plan. So this is where we get quite a lot of detail in terms of cost and benefits profiles, split various ways, so split by what we call RDEL and CDEL, which is effectively CapEx and OpEx costs, or resourcing costs. A lot of milestone data. So these projects don't just have our stage gate assessments in as milestones, they'll have all their internal approvals, all their treasury approvals. And you know, a typical project will have, some of them will have literally dozens of milestones that they report to us, including those delivery milestones as well. So that's the approved plan, and then which is your baseline effectively, and then the current plan is the forecast. So exactly the same data, but just obviously allowing us to see any variance between their current forecasts and the approved plans. The top right there, the current outlook, is where we collect risk information. So each project will submit its top risks to us with a description and some categorization and some risk rating, crucially. And also one of our most disseminated and most requested pieces of data, which is the delivery confidence assessment. So every quarter, both the project and the IPA will give a RAG rating, which is similar to the stage gate assessment RAGs in terms of the criteria and definitions. But these are the key things that let you see, are the key piece of data that lets you see at a glance whether a project is on track for delivery or not. And that's really important for our analysis because it's something that's obviously common to every project, regardless of size, regardless of what it's delivering, and has been collected pretty much from day one of the GMPP. Then just touching on the people data. So again, pretty crucial in terms of data analysis, particularly when we talk about leading indicators and some of those crucial things I was talking about in terms of the professional capability, the size and capability of the project team. I've got a slide on that later, I think, so I'll go into more detail on that. And the project leadership. So who is the SRO? The civil service, I don't know if anyone on the call is a civil servant, but the civil service has a bit of an obsession with professions. You can't just be in a job, you have to have a profession. So we track whether the SROs and PDs are project delivery professionals or something else. You know, you will have some who are policy professionals, and that obviously gives us a bit of a, well, paints a target on their back for the MPLA and training programs we offer, actually, if they're not project delivery professionals. And one of our key metrics, time commitment to the project. So I think it's well established that the commitment of a strong SRO is pretty crucial to project delivery. So we track very carefully the amount of time that these SROs are able to dedicate, and the PDs are able to dedicate to the project. So what do we do with all that data? Produce loads of reports is a short answer to that. Here's a little snapshot of a few things we do, and they are deliberately tiny pictures. You're not supposed to be able to read them, but we produce a whole range of reporting to a whole range of people. So here you can see, for example, on the number 2 on the left there, profession dashboard. So this is all the stuff I was just talking about, the SRO time on project size and shape of the delivery of the project delivery teams, and where that goes. So that gets sent internally to the IPA, to our Minister, Lord Agnew, over to Treasury, and departmental views go to PermSecs and project delivery heads of profession. So quite a wide distribution. The overview slides as well circulated widely across government giving an overview, as the name suggests, overview of the portfolio. And then we've got some of the more specific ones like the quarterly performance dashboards and performance framework scorecard, which drill down into some of the key performance metrics for those projects. So these are things like schedule and cost variances, any change in their stated NPVs or benefits, as well as their DCA ratings. The other thing we do with it, of course, is analysis. So we conduct a lot of analysis on this quite rich data set. Here's some, again, you're not meant to be able to see what they are, so don't worry about that. I'll describe them a little bit later on. But here's where we're doing the analysis of those projects to try and identify, well, various things such as where our interventions might be most valuable, which projects are at risk of going off track, etc. And all of that's, as a bullet point says, geared towards identifying and facilitating system level improvements, as well as tracking and monitoring those GMPP projects. So it's about making specific interventions to specific projects, as well as identifying the things that are going wrong in the project delivery system as a whole across government. So a bit more on reporting. So like everyone's reporting, the aim of it is to give all our stakeholders the information they need to make good decisions. And those decisions in the context of the IPA are all about making good interventions into those projects and highlighting the things that need to be highlighted if there's an intervention required, say from Cabinet Office, from the government, or from Treasury. And they're all specifically designed. We've got, I mean, you can probably see a few of them there on the page. We've got a number of them which are quite specific audience, quite specific purposes. But there's a whole lot more than that we do, that we basically pick and mix some of that data to provide some bespoke reports to people as well. And as I said, they're looking to summarize that project data, identify where they're going off track, and track that system level performance. So in terms of the portfolio level, this is a sneak peek. The Sankey chart here is a sneak peek of something from the annual report, which was sufficiently anonymous that I could share it today. But as you might guess, a portfolio level reporting is looking at that portfolio view of how things are going generally across the GMPP. So we're looking for big changes quarter on quarter or year on year, either by the portfolio as a whole or broken down by department, annual report category, or other criteria such as specific government initiatives like Build Back Better and all the other sound bites that you might have heard from the government. These are often used as a jumping off point to identify the projects and departments of interest. So with almost 200 projects on the GMPP, it's very rare that something will jump out at you at portfolio level. You know, there's not huge swings from quarter to quarter, but what it does do is give you a bit of insight into, you know, where you might need to look deeper. So if you look at the Sankey chart again, you can see the blue at the bottom. You've got some, which represents the joiners. You can see a line going up to the red assessment. So that would indicate that some project has been brought onto the GMPP that's already failing and might warrant further attention. In terms of project level reporting, this is just a sample of one of our reports. So as you can see, quite detailed, lots of colour, quite widely used as well. So these again serve as a bit of a conversation starter for each project. So for example, we'll issue these to our assurance teams, to our project leads, to have those quality conversations with the project about specific areas of concern. Equally, where things are going well as well. So we do like to encourage a sharing of good practice and lessons learned across the project community within government, and for our own benefit. So if something's gone right, we want to know why, so we can apply that elsewhere. These are generally targeted, as I said, more towards the projects rather than higher up into government. But obviously, we do take bits of this out and share it with the Cabinet and with the Prime Minister as well. And the annual report, which I mentioned a couple of times, this is what it'll look like. I'd encourage you all to have a read tomorrow. It's a fantastic document. It gives a really solid overview of the GMPP in much more detail than I've been able to give you today, including case studies of several projects and updates on the priorities and focus of the IPA. It's published alongside some annexes with supplemental data. And this is probably easy for me to say, and you'll probably take this with a pinch of salt, but it really does provide quite a lot of transparency on the performance of the portfolio. There are some exemptions, some things we don't share where they're particularly sensitive. I mean, typically that's MOD projects where we don't like to shout about them being late, for example, if they are. But it gives projects nowhere to hide because we do publish their delivery confidence assessments. So if a project is going wrong, this is where you will see it. And it's an independent, obviously, from the project publication. It's not doctored or altered in any way. It is the true opinion of the IPA on all these projects. So a really, really impactful report, and one that I'd encourage everyone to have a look at if you've got any interest at all. It's also very pretty, as you can see from the cover there. It's much nicer looking than my presentation. Okay. Other reporting we do. So I've mentioned reporting up to the Prime Minister and Cabinet. So if you follow the news and know this government at all, you'll know that there's a really big focus on infrastructure delivery. So we do quite a lot of reporting up to the Prime Minister, preparation of materials for him, both packs from us and into the 10DS reporting, which is the number 10 data science team that produce a wonderful dashboard that's used across government, the highest levels of government, to sort of report on all this performance of these major infrastructure projects. To permanent secretaries, so these are the head civil servants within the various departments, and of course to their ministers as well. Given the value and the scale of these projects, the importance of them, there's a lot of scrutiny and a lot of requests for data at the highest levels of government, and it's my team that provide all that data to them. And it'll vary depending on the topic. So I said before, we've got our static reports, our regular publications, but we will pick a mix from those and create bespoke reports to cover specific policy areas. So levelling up is one example of that, which you may have heard of, which is about developing the regions, of which I'm a part because I'm a Cabinet Office recruit in Birmingham, so in one of our satellite hubs. It could be for specific project types, for specific committees. So, for example, infrastructure has its own special committees which we prepare materials for, or for specific purposes, such as the spending review. The spending review is the Treasury process for allocating budgets to departments. So when we've got in excess of £500 billion of lifetime cost that we collect data on and report on, obviously Treasury are very interested in what we've got to say about those projects, and usually whether any money can be saved, if we're honest, but they're looking to us to provide that to them. And we work quite closely with other analytical teams at the centre of government. So I mentioned 10DS as a fantastic, very talented team over in the 10 data science team, doing very, very clever stuff. I mean, they don't even touch, if you mention Excel to them, they'd shudder. They don't even touch BI tools. They're all coding in Python and R. And with the Prime Minister's implementation unit, which is, I think, has been officially renamed to the Prime Minister's delivery unit, but this is a team that's responsible for those specific policy areas and making sure things actually happen, like levelling up and like Build Back Better. Okay, reporting enhancements. I'll just touch on this a little bit because I'm sure there'll be questions about this. But where we're looking to develop this is to expand on that quite comprehensive base of quite descriptive reports. So we describe the state of the portfolio a lot without necessarily digging too far into the why things are happening or how things are happening. I'll talk a bit more about that when I get to the analysis slides, but it's a key aim of ours to sort of build on that very solid base we've got. Filling gaps in our current reporting offering as well. So as new groups are formed within government, as new committees form, we respond to that by creating new reports. Another key thing is identifying leading indicators, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little while. A lot of all our data comes in arrears, So it comes quarterly. By the time we get it, have processed it and published our reports, it's often a month or more out of date, if it was ever fresh to begin with. So we're doing a lot of work to try and identify those leading indicators that will tell us which projects are likely to suffer a decrease in performance, rather than just reporting on it after it happens. And then the other thing we're doing internally is enhancing the visibility of that key data and information through the building of a hub, so a data and analysis hub, targeted initially within the IPA, but then across government, to basically show these reports and the expanded reporting base to everybody across government, and not just the selected recipients who are lucky enough to get it in their email inbox. Okay, on to analysis. So analysis, overall aim is to improve project delivery in government, as we said. So this leads to some quite big questions, obvious questions in a way. A key one being, which projects are showing risks to successful delivery, what actions and interventions can improve project performance, and is the system operating effectively? So that's what we're trying to address with our analysis. So an example of analysis that shows which projects are at risk. So we have the delivery confidence assessment, which should be a forward-looking indicator, is often actually not. It's actually indicative of things having gone wrong. But one of the pieces of work we've done recently is to make more use of our spend profiles data to give a bit of a look at the S-curves. So if anyone here is familiar with projects and budgeting and how cost profiles usually look, this one's a bit atypical actually, because what we see in a lot of projects is forecasts lagging the baseline with a miraculous recovery in later years that suddenly brings them up bang onto budget and delivery on time. So what we've done is, this is actually built in R, this is coded in R. It's built a report that essentially serves Treasury that information to say, look, there's a project here that is underspending, so it'll look good in your budget, but it's forecasting this increased ramp up in costs, which either has to be paid for, or a discussion needs to be had with them to see whether that's realistic or not. I think that's something that's common to all projects, isn't it? The initial delay and then miraculous recovery. We also look at some other forward-looking indicators such as risk. So we mine the risk data, do a bit of text mining on that to draw out key themes, such as COVID and Brexit being two of the key themes we've been looking at over the past year or so. And reference class forecasting works. This is another piece of machine learning work that I'm assuming, well, I'll describe quickly what reference class forecasting is. It's basically taking a look at a project, comparing the characteristics of that with other projects or a sample of other projects, and making predictions about its future performance. So it's where we know a lot about a project. We know we have a rich data set showing what projects that look and feel a bit like that project have performed, and where, if they have suffered from decreasing performance, where and how that's happened. So that's quite an interesting piece of work as well, and obviously hugely beneficial to those projects starting out, if we can signpost some of those key risks to them in advance. In terms of actions and interventions, this is another obviously key one for us as an organisation, all about where we can deploy our limited resources most effectively. So where does the IPA get most bang for its buck? And this is a really challenging piece because it's very difficult to isolate the effects of those individual interventions, particularly because of the range of projects we have. What's good for one project might not necessarily be effective in another. So the big changes we tend to only be able to see at a system level in terms of things have got better without being able to pinpoint, well, it was that initiative that had this quantifiable effect. But we do nevertheless try to identify where that system is not performing well, how we can support projects in these areas. And I highlighted the assurance and professional capability data as being central to those questions, because they are the best way of us being able to analyse and solve that problem, analyse the data and solve that problem. Because the assurance data, I think I've got a slide actually, yes, good. The assurance data is really rich, but with loads of free text. So an analyst's nightmare. There's loads of good stuff in there, but not categorised and not easily analysed. But we do go to some efforts to identify the common categories of recommendations, so we know where projects are basically having improvement notices issued on certain recommendations, and prevent surprises in those projects. So if you've got a big problem in, say, your program management, it shouldn't be a surprise when your schedule starts to slip, for example. I mean, I'm being very simplistic there, but you get the idea. And that's a hugely valuable data set to us in terms of the things I talked about. So seeing where our insight into those projects and the areas of weakness, and where we might need to address those and where our impact is most keenly felt. In terms of professional capability, like for a lot of projects, regardless of whether they're public sector or not, the availability of those project professionals is a really key risk, a really key consideration. So we monitor resource levels in quite a lot of detail, and you can see a cut of the report on the bottom right there, showing the size of project teams, the resource gaps, and the capability assessment as well. A capability assessment is a self-assessment that the projects do, but again, very, very useful to us because it signposts where we might expect to see problems with a particular project or group of projects in the future. So for example, if a lot of projects are flashing ambers or reds for project delivery, that could be indicative of a problem on the horizon. Likewise with the specific areas, depending on the project, will have more impact than others. So we look at that not just in isolation, but in terms of the type of project that's showing those indicators as well. Only a couple more slides, almost done. But before I finish, let's talk a little bit about benchmarking. So this is a big piece of work that's been underway for quite a while, about 18 months, to develop a centralized benchmarking hub for government, which for the first time will record and store data on the actual outcome costs of projects and physical assets down to the asset level. So assets being things like tunnels, stations, prisons, hospitals. So these support and underpin the investment case. They obviously help the projects give more accurate cost estimates when they're starting out. Hugely valuable data set and resource when it's up and running. So that data will be available to all project teams and delivery organizations, stored in a standard and consistent way. Like it says here, to ensure quality and fidelity of the data, so we know what we're actually benchmarking against. I mean, crucially, in terms of the business case for this piece of work, it'll also mitigate the need for us to rely on third parties to provide or sell, in some cases, our own data back to our projects. So when a contractor builds a hospital, they will try and sell that cost data back to us at a later date. So it's just seeking to address that and obviously get better value for the taxpayer of what is essentially our data to use. Finally, challenges and what we're doing to address them. So one of our key challenges is the large differences in project delivery maturity across departments, or the project delivery capability, I guess. There's some departments which are very experienced with delivering projects. So I mentioned before, departments like DFT, MOD. In particular, I think they're probably they are the two biggest in terms of the size of their portfolios, but a lot of deep expertise. Others have other departments not necessarily as mature. So if you think of departments like DCMS, the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, delivers some huge projects like the Olympics, but also has loads of other ongoing stuff that isn't project delivery. So they're very reliant on sort of peaky profiles for their expertise, which means they don't typically embed it within the department. That's starting to change because departments like DCMS are picking up more and more projects, BAYS as well, picking up more and more projects that are entering onto the GMPP. But it presents a challenge to us because if we start to have conversations with those departments about sort of project controls level data, it becomes a bit of a struggle because they just don't have the maturity to be able to provide what we may like to ask of them. It also means stakeholder management is really important for us, for the IPA in generally, but for my team as well. So a lot of conversations about when we ask for this data, what do we actually mean? Making sure they're aware of the support offered from the IPA as well. I think that is pretty much mission accomplished for that. I think everyone knows who we are. But another quite interesting piece of machine learning we've done is using a clustering algorithm to identify similar projects. And by similar, I mean when a project joins a GMPP, we basically send them a letter that says, welcome to the GMPP, here's what you've got to do. Here's some projects that you would benefit from talking to because they are similar, share characteristics with the projects you're undertaking. And that's intended to help get these projects and departments up to speed with what's required. Another challenge, and one I bet a lot of people here can sympathise with, is the data collection being complex and difficult to automate. I said earlier, our data collection system was Excel-based, now system-based, a huge step up. But the system maturity is relatively low, even within the IPA, so it is a user form. And we're now looking at exploring other methods such as direct file upload, so drag and dropping Excel files directly into a server effectively, and even APIs where the systems will support that. But because of that differing maturity, because of the disparate systems in use across government, it's very difficult to implement a one-size-fits-all, which means often we find ourselves catering to that lowest common denominator. We're also getting our own house in order by replacing some legacy systems that we use, and implementation of enterprise-level BI. Which we didn't have previously. Finally, one of the key challenges we have for our analysis in particular is the depth of the data. So I alluded to this earlier, that we have a broad scope in terms of the data we collect, but it's still quite high level. So it's still at a program level, program cost level. And things like earned value are just not possible, even if the projects have the data, which obviously some will, and will be doing earned value analysis for their own purposes. We just can't ask for that from everybody because we just wouldn't get it. Also a consideration, the different drivers and considerations for performance. So we might have projects that on paper are performing badly, but there'll be political aspects that mean that project is a priority, for example, and therefore warrants more attention than it might otherwise, even if it's progressing well, actually. So what we're trying to do about that is through the things like the Projects Academy is to increase that capability. And there's a lot of work as well going on with system development and system integration across government, largely led by GDS, Government Digital Service, to basically give us more options for our data collection. It does mean, because of the relatively simplistic data we get, we do have to be more creative with our analysis techniques, and that basically means being more creative with the algorithms we run and with the indicators that we use and caveats that we apply. But with all of that in mind, we are always looking at that IPA remit to concentrate on delivery, performance, and reporting accuracy. What we're not about, because there's other parts of government to do that, is developing fancy data science capabilities. We have to keep a bit of a focus on how do we report accurately, provide transparency. Secondary, a little bit secondary to that, how do we identify the areas where we can improve that performance? And that is the end of the presentation. So thank you very much for listening.